Chapter 35. Audinhone stood watching the slight bursts of bright light wink themselves out of existence, 13 in all, as he turned his head slowly to Chen Yu Hung. 13? The Iphyra, Deputy Director. She took the full arsenal of that Venator topside. Audinhone turned to the captain fully. Side sacrificed his own to screen for Relentless? He asked in astonished disbelief. Captain Vorshak will be honored as the hero the Emperor needed in a battle of Ambria, Deputy Director. A valiant act of gallantry that everyone aboard the Relentless will remember, Hung responded. Audinhone pulled his features into a tight grimace as he held his contempt in check, knowing that reason had no place on the captain's bridge. And the crew of the Iphyra, Captain, will be honored alongside her captain. Audinhone only shook his head slowly as he turned his view back to that of the encroaching sphere of Ambria through the viewport. Captain, the rear fleet is disengaging. A technician interrupted Walker's attention as he turned his head over his shoulder again. The fighter contingent is dispersing and jumping. Pursue? Do not, Hung responded, his eyes still focused on the nearing planet. Tell Sar to stand down his fighter wings. Sir, there are 2 remaining fighters, an RZ-2 A-Wing interceptor and an A-01. Hung turned immediately to the technician. Where? Aft of Harrow. Sir, she is opening her foils. Hung lifted his head. Maytac. Static was his only response. Helms, Brucal, break formation, port roll, and distance us from Harrell. Immediately. He spun quickly to face the technician again. Belay that order to Sauer. I want those wings prepared for full-on assault. Audinhone processed the information analytically, curious about a thought that he had consistently found reason to work its way into the forefront. Always reactive, never proactive. It's no wonder they always seem to snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat, Walker mumbled. What was that? Hung asked. The perspective before them began to roll the planet out of view, distancing itself from the opposing Acclamator as quickly as possible. Nothing, Captain. I am just positing some reason for myself to digest. Hung shook his head, ready to be rid of the dogmatic Deputy Director. The view before them displayed the planet and the prone Star Destroyer desperately trying to gain a tactical advantage. Hung, the Technec barked loudly, the voice frustrated. Maytac, Chen Yu responded. We can't shake these 2. They match all evasive and maintain a tight threshold on our starboard rim. I suggest you and Brucal make haste planetside. We're going to The clear transmission instantly burst into static. Maytac! Maytac! The captain turned to face him. Hung repeated an earnest attempt, which Walker found foolish. In unison, they slowly fixated their gazes toward the Harrell in time to watch a ball of fire disgorge from the portside hangar. A brilliant conglomeration of colors representing the bulk of the vessel's interior components, spewing wildly from the breach. The shipboard lighting from thousands of view panels flickered to darkness. The Star Destroyer bathed in an unhindered collage of color as explosions began to transcend the topside hull in a ripple effect of destruction. Audinhone felt his mouth drop open as he watched the slow internal destruction of the Acclamator consume the viewport entirely before the ship finally succumbed to the radiant heat and volatile gases within. A final blinding flash of white caused him to turn away with a gasp. Argh! He bellowed, immediately bringing his fingers to his eyes to rub out the pain. 2 fighters? Not just fighters, Deputy Director. You have just witnessed the deadly capabilities of an A-01 in the hands of someone who knows how to handle it, Chen Yu Hung replied, Walker noting stoic respect in his voice despite the cost. And either by privilege or dumb luck, they managed to target the only vessel among our contingent that could provide ample challenge. Audinhone squinted his eyes open, burning and itching. Do you have nothing in the belly of this beast to counter? A few flights of LNs would approximate nothing more than target practice, I am afraid. No, Deputy Director, we are equipped to deal directly with land-based insurrections, Hung explained. Audinhone found that mildly odd considering where they were having the conversation, but let it go out of turn. Hung spun around suddenly. Where are they, Corporal? Quickly approaching Executor. Apologies, Captain. We had lost their signal briefly after the blast. Audinhone noted the hesitation, realizing the Corporal was the only one to register any level of reaction, much less display any emotion. I need to get off this ship, he thought to himself. They can't possibly mean to attack that B-Wing. It hasn't had sufficient time to charge its composite inverters, Hung said curiously, his finger and thumb pinching at the strands of hair at his beard. Perhaps they can't leave, Audinhone suggested, feigning interest. Perhaps one does not. Audinhone turned slightly, his interest rekindled. Quite noble, then, if it is the case. Captain, vessel reverting from hyperspace. Signature scrambled. Origination is intra-system. The corporal shouted with an unnerving familiarity. Hung spun immediately and ran to the man's console bank, eyeing the data output. Dracelian spice hauler? I think not, Yamat. Hung said with a smile, his usually expressionless features creasing. Sighed, your YT-1760 has finally made its appearance. Audinhone couldn't help but roll his eyes into the viewport as Side's chiding petulance echoed through the command deck. Leave it be, Captain. Our quarry is planetside. Sir, the spice hauler is dock clamping the A-01, a technician reported farther down the console row. It's not a spice haul. Thank you for the report, Hung said, adding pleasantry only after catching himself losing composure. Audinhone felt the edges of his lips pull back into his cheeks, but refused to let the laugh he was brewing disclose his cynicism to anyone on the command deck. That settles any threat that may pose to the prone dreadnoughts. Now of the Baleen? Hung asked the question loosely, waiting for intelligible feedback. Audinhone chose his time. If there are no longer threats to either the Relentless or Executor, I would like to shuttle over to offer assistance. Hung held a hand before him, pausing the initiated feedback from his analytics team, and turned to face the deputy director. His eyes slightly narrowed, the only outwardly visible signal of mistrust. But of course, deputy director, the hangar is at your disposal. Walker didn't wait for a second longer, letting the final words of the captain's analytics huddle blend in with the churning hum vibrating through the ship's hull. He paused momentarily, eyeing the datapad that had been the captain's suspicious link toward any malfeasance, resting nonchalantly on the rim of the aft holotable. Audinhone waved slightly to get Hung's attention, pointing a finger at the device once it was achieved. Hung nodded quickly, then waved a dismissive hand in his direction. Walker snatched the device without hesitation and left the command deck without another glance. ETA for extraction, Voman asked hurriedly, his pacing picking up momentum and speed. 30 seconds, someone offered the report, but Voman paid little attention to the source. He cared only for specifics as the internal battle between tactical analysis and gut-wrenching emotion waged on. It would take effort on his part to scan the faces of a crew he already knew to be downtrodden, dejected, and split between grief and anger. I want the Macoons on last. They will need to cover our withdrawal, he said, stifling his own turmoil and inner rage. He knew the window was narrow enough to get them off planet and out of the system, but he felt relieved when the technician reported Kala's decision. I'm going down there, Vos stated, striking a complex chord within the Lanik that spiraled his thoughts. Voman only looked up and into his friend's eyes. 1,000 reasons to deny the Kefar were defeated by 1,000 reasons to support the endeavor. I do not know your interests with Ambria, my old friend, but I will not stand in your way. Go, Voman croaked, his emotions challenging his mettle, his voice betraying him. Quinlan Vos only smiled as he turned toward the massive hangar bay. Stay well, my friend, Lanik thought, deftly wiping a tear from the corner of his eye. Ani, try Nadali again, Ahsoka said with a nod toward the Mirialan. raising her hand to divert her attention to the clear skies above them. I have 'em, Rex said, lowering his quad knocks. By the walkers. He trailed off the statement in bewilderment. Ahsoka understood the hesitation as she felt the clone's sympathy mingling with his confusion, her own confusion. Why had he backed down from an opportunity to carry out his promise? Why was he now, in effect, providing rescue to the troopers and crews caught within the metallic tangle? This stood in such stark contrast to his admissions not minutes before. What did I miss? She thought to herself. Ahsoka observed the battlefield as mobile units of all make and models scurried across the barren terrain toward the decant position along the valley's eastern rim. A survey that became more disheartening with each passing second. All for what? She murmured aloud. Because they were destined to, Nara mouthed, close enough to Ahsoka for only the two to hear. What do you mean? Ahsoka whispered over her shoulder. In truth, I do not know, as I do not understand why Vader is not carrying through with his assignment, Nara responded. Ahsoka could answer, but chose not to, unwilling to divulge his true intentions to anyone else. None of this makes any sense to me, she said, changing both topic and focal point for those around her. War never does, Ahsoka, Rex responded without a second passing, wiping sweat from his brow. Nara suddenly froze with a gasp that surprised them all, a moment before the ground beneath their feet vibrated lightly. None of them said a word. Mushi turned a quizzical gaze toward his matron as he tucked his ears behind his head. Sand particles danced over the rocky terrain, swirling in delicate eddies and rearranged into complex geometrical patterns as the vibrations continued. A noted silence cascaded through the valley as they increased in frequency and strength, everyone pinching off their senses to focus on hearing. Ahsoka reared her head back over her shoulder. Nara, what is it? She whispered. The tether is torn, Ahsoka. She is free. Nara whispered back, squinting through the knowledge the spirits had been trying to impart from inception. We need to leave, she uttered as a muted roar destroyed the eerie silence with otherworldly conviction. Each of them felt the extent of the depth of the sound conveyed upon the internal organs and skeletal structures alike. Ahsoka whipped her gaze in all directions, trying to source the painful sounds and vibrations, only passively paying attention to the speeder bikes, tanks, and other heavy weaponry making their hasty retreat. An ear-splitting thump that threatened to destroy her mantra erupted from all directions, a magnified version of thousands of impacts. She thought only seconds before the lake, some distance away, geysered its contents a half-kilometer into the sky. Another resounding thump sent rivers of sand and debris skyward as divergent cracks formed around the lake's edges. Kawani dashed to Ahsoka's side. The comm was brief. Nadali is leaving. She needs to divert side. Only the stars know where R3 took the Liberator. Something about a B-wing, and there's nothing but Imperials in orbit, she said rapidly, tapping Ahsoka's shoulder in the process. We're on our own. Ahsoka tried making sense of the natural phenomena, the cascading rainfall of the geysered water raining down on the dry, parched ground around them. The cracks formed at the lake's edges, stretching in chaotic arcs of fracture in all directions, greedily inhaling the fallen water as fast as it was falling. The ground rumbled again, nearly knocking them from their feet, stones pinging as the quakes drove hairline fractures deep into the bedrock below them. A deep, reverberating gurgle echoed through the valley, the four looking to one another for some semblance of explanation. The eerie silence returned as Ahsoka felt her heart slam in her chest, each breath strenuously more complex than the next. A single black talon rose from the caldera of Lake Naath's bed, curling over the shoreline with a tendon-snapping strength. As the first talon dug its meter-long claw into the rocky surface of Ambria, 3 more talons followed, 60 meters distant. A similar scenario was taking place along the northern shoreline. Ahsoka's heart all but stopped as the powerful appendages tightened in unison, rock shredding like flayed flesh as it tore from its birthstone. Despite the presence of Rex and Kawani, Nara and Mushi, Ahsoka felt inexplicably alone, distancing from the attachments she had nourished and cultivated as if she were willingly abandoning them. The fight began earnestly for control of her fears as solitude closed in on her. She felt a looming disparity between her conscience and the enormity of those fears, a singularity that threatened to separate her will from her soul. A chortling howl echoed through the valley as the talons continued to rise from the caldera, revealing meters-wide knuckles and the remainder of a 6-digit appendage that shone a dull black as it absorbed the sun's light. Ahsoka's arms felt heavy, intending to retrieve her sabers from her waist, but failing as they dropped helplessly to her side, her elbows crackling with intense pain. She glanced at Kawani, who was struggling to remain standing, her knees visibly shaking. Rex was looking down at the rocks at his feet, fingers trailing over the sharpened blade tucked in his belt, clearly struggling with something. Nara was seated cross-legged, physically sobbing into open palms, each of them suffering through a very personal agony. 2 more appendages flared from the caldera, totaling 4. Ahsoka watched them all clench, rending severe gouges into the ground beneath them, muscles audibly contracting as the gigantic maw thrust its way skyward with a deafening roar. Ahsoka could find no memory from her past to compare to the sight before her, craning her neck to look upon the gargantuan black beast. Fanged teeth like the crown of spiked rock formations on Malachor lined the creature's massive maw, easily giant enough to consume them all. 4 sets of eyes, brilliant orbs of a sickly orange, rotated freely in all directions as it surveyed its newfound freedom. The creature moved faster than seemed physically possible as it pulled the remainder of itself from the caldera prison it had come. 2 more rear appendages mirroring the first 4, and a thick tail as long as the creature's body. Ahsoka had no way of gauging the creature's length or height without measuring in terms of starships she was familiar with. The ground shook with ferocity each time it shifted into a new position. Ahsoka, feeling the enormity of the creature in terms of the despair that repeatedly flared through her, each desperately seeking any form of hope that remained within her, with murderous intent. She closed her eyes, ready to accept the encroaching darkness, the feeling of absolution taking complete control of her senses. Ahsoka felt a sharp slap across her face. Something harsh and abrasive had made solid contact with her jaw. She jolted from the pain, feeling a moment of vertigo as the blood in her brain tried to keep pace with her movements. She cracked her eyes open, hoping to find that they were all far away from the monstrous beast that had emerged from the belly of Ambria, but found that she had only roused herself from its rocky surface. What the hell? She thought to herself as she whipped her head around, seeing if the others were still with her, each movement causing dizzying waves of nausea. They were all rousing themselves just as she was, the creature very much real as it forcibly arched its back, every muscle in its 6 legs contracting, with severe bulges under the thick, dry scales covering its body from head to tail. Another deafening bellow escaped its maw as Ahsoka watched its eyes focus in tandem on something behind her. She slowly turned her head to avoid the discombobulation and saw the same baleen freighter returning, its forward hangar door opened wide as contrails of dust raced toward it. When she was aware that the beast's gaze was no longer on her, Ahsoka felt a renewal of her self-awareness. The despair that threatened to shred her into oblivion had vanished. She felt her fears disperse into an afterthought as they retreated with every breath she took in the recesses of memory. Ahsoka looked toward the creature and then again at the freighter as the mobile units raced up its boarding ramp, understanding beginning to take shape. "Rex," she shouted as she spun to face the clone. "I'm alive. What is this thing?" he said with a raspy twang in his voice. "An ancient evil," Nara spoke up. "An evil that had been held at bay for eons by Thon's will. an evil that had remained tethered to the planet's core by Xana's foresight, she said, rising to her feet. Ahsoka noticed an exuberant pride in the woman's voice, an evil unleashed by Tsar's machinations. Ahsoka felt the need to intervene on the fallen Zeltron's behalf, but resisted the sentiment. She turned to Kawani to see the same opinion register within the Mirialan's eyes as she removed her helmet and tucked it under her arm. She mouthed their thoughts. Did we ever know his intentions? Whatever it is, none of them will be with us any longer, Nara continued. The Force has taken them. What about that? Rex responded with a finger pointed toward the behemoth. When it took the clone to utter the words, the sound of high-powered turbo laser fire erupted from their left. Each of them whirled to see large beads of red, superheated energy slamming into the beast's broadside, one after another. Continuing to span their view, they followed the energy to its source, finding 4 of the 5 Imperial AT-ATs unleashing hell upon the creature. A dark-cloaked figure atop the lead walker, rocking his stance with outstretched hands. Ahsoka felt momentary pity for the Imperials as she returned her gaze to the targeted beast, seeing their efforts glance harmlessly off the massive scales. Judging by the ordnance, those turbo lasers are at maximum power, Rex said, the quad knocks at his brow. Which means we're not taking this down through normal means, Ahsoka responded. I don't think we're taking this thing down by any means, Kawani added. Nara turned to them all, her lips quivering. She had something to add, Ahsoka thought, noting the hesitation in the woman's eyes. What, Nara? If you know something, now is the time to share it. The only way is to enact the same methods that kept it tethered, Nara said hesitantly, her figure drooping as her features turned downward. That would require sacrifice, Nara, and not a means to an end. Ahsoka replied with a growing strength, igniting her resolve. She looked up again toward the creature, realizing it was removing its gaze from the freighter and swinging its head toward Vader and the torrential hellfire of the walkers. She watched on with growing understanding as the laser fire began to slow, Vader beginning to shift in his stance. It only has sway over what it focuses on, she thought, piecing together the gut-wrenching despair she had felt earlier and the scrutiny of the grotesque orange eye. Seconds later, bright green beams shot overhead, slamming into the creature's neck from the east. Ahsoka snapped her head around to see several of the scurrying land units utilizing the ion disruptors mounted atop them. She whirled her view yet again to the beast and watched as it swung its neck back toward the freighter. At least it doesn't know what to focus on, she thought, grateful that the creature wasn't lashing out and rampaging across the valley floor. A distant speck in the Ambrian sky caught her attention, just over the creature's right shoulder, a speck that was closing the distance between itself and the behemoth's back quickly. Nara, this thing is about to get pinned between 3 separate forces. Can you keep it from moving? Ahsoka asked, the plan formulating. How the hell do you expect me to do that? Nara asked with a veritable rise in pitch. Yes. Oh, get inside its head, woman, Kawani added, clearly understanding Ahsoka's intent. Yes, while we actually get inside its head, Ahsoka added to the questioning looks of all 3 of them. I'm not sure I quite understand, but realize this isn't some dumb creature acting on instinct, Nara exclaimed. It is Hssiss, Nara, a queen at that. To assume it's some dumb creature would be our last and final mistake. I know enough of this planet's history to understand precisely where we are, but to clarify, what exactly are you saying? Ahsoka rattled off quickly, averting the crazed look in all their eyes. The sorceress, Ahsoka, her spirit resided within it, Nara responded immediately. Ahsoka considered the comment. I propose we do more than Master Thon had conceived, she continued after her brief deliberation, seeing the uneasy glance between Kawani and Rex. Apologies, but there will be time to explain in more detail later. If we survive, Rex cut her off. Yes, Rex, if we survive. Why even bother? Let Vader deal with it, Kawani blurted. It isn't always our job to fix everything wrong, Ahsoka, she said, tossing her helmet on the ground. Ahsoka winced at the words, confident now that she would need to explain herself to those she cared for the most. In most cases, I would agree with you, Ani. What did you do, Ahsoka? I've been at your side long enough to understand where that comment is headed, Kawani said, tensing her facial features into lines of anger. Ahsoka felt her forehead bead with sweat as inner anger fought for superiority. Yet she relaxed from deprecating her protege. I allowed Tsar to transcend after possessing the power and circumstance to obliterate him. His part in this is unknown to me, so I will not own or take responsibility for it. She blew out the pensive breath as she felt the weight of responsibility press down upon her nonetheless. Presenting Master Windu's saber to Master Vos is what I will take responsibility for. That thing is here because of that decision, she said, almost shouting as she pointed toward the snarling beast. On cue, the behemoth set its head back and bellowed another of its deafening roars, rattling their rib cages and vibrating the rock and stone under their feet. Kawani shook her head out of frustration, but wouldn't press her issue any further. She knew it was pointless in any event. It wouldn't solve the problem, and Ahsoka was right. Kawani knew she would not have chosen differently had the choice been hers. Acclamator Class SD coming in fast. Judging trajectory, I can safely suggest that the creature is its target, Rex said, lowering the Nox again. He nodded toward Vader. He must have made that call. Ahsoka canted her head as she strained her view to watch the cloaked Sith lowered atop the Imperial Walker, again surprising her with his uncharacteristic decisions. She was beginning to feel that they were driven by more than common sense, or some semblance of rationality that he held from Anakin's commitment to reason in the past. Either way, he was a conundrum she couldn't trust, just as she wasn't sure about the trust she had placed in Tsar. Ahsoka, Kawani shouted, waving her hands in front of her face. Are you with us? Yes, sorry, Ahsoka responded, blinking her eyes in embarrassment. This is a poor time to let your mind wander, Kawani said. Nara is going to attempt her incantation, she began. We'll need to know your plan, she finished, a hand splayed toward Rex. Ahsoka looked up to see the Star Destroyer drifting closer to the creature as it descended with amplified repulsor watch, a chugging bass that plastered the valley with waves of sonic assault, creating another storm of airborne pebbles and debris. She looked again toward the east, noting the ramp pulling itself up and into the ship as the sizable overhead hangar door closed, a single shuttle emerging from its depths before the door closed with silent authority. The first of the bombarding fuselage shot with the sonorous report, the Acclamator claiming full attention of everyone within the valley. The creature bellowed louder than before out of desperate annoyance as the first energy blast slammed into its spine. It was followed quickly by a rapid cadence of echoing reports, finding their successive targets among the thick, scaly hide, each impact driving the creature lower to the ground. The green bursts increasing in ferocity as those on the descending Star Destroyer adjusted power levels, working to find lethal consequence. The behemoth snarled before chugging its throat. Ahsoka was unsure if it was in pain or irritation. The profound baritone results squeezing at her internal organs. It continued snaking its head over its shoulder as it continued the painful chortle, building in frequency and intensity. The blast from the Star Destroyer began to slow as the ship descended even lower, too close to the beast in Ahsoka's opinion. I can't focus on its mind with that damn ship drawing its attention, Nara shouted to be heard. Ahsoka snapped her head to lock on Kawani's A-180. Ani, could you get its attention? She said, pointing to the rifle. Kawani looked from the rifle to Ahsoka, her expression changing from estranged disbelief to outright shock. You're witnessing the uselessness of high-powered energy blasts from her Star Destroyer. What do you think I'm going to do with that? Ahsoka spread a wry smile across her pursed lips. They may have power, but not your accuracy, Ani. She finished with a wink. Ahsoka continued whirling her gaze in an effort to make some sense of what was transpiring. There were far too many elements to consider, an excessive amount of moving parts preventing her from gauging her motives. Tsar had led them here and was now inexplicably gone. Ahsoka turned to face Nara, scrutinizing the woman who mirrored Barris's every physical attribute. However, looking deeper, beyond those attributes that she had imprinted a memory, she felt the novelty of naked truth. Where Barris had always concealed her inner self, Nora wore it on her sleeve. Perhaps I am just trying to look too deeply.